Good evening, my dear friend. In today's presentation, I would like to give you some idea about the background to the play The Importance of Being Honest by Oscar Wilde. We all know that Oscar Wilde was a great wit. He was one of the social celebrities of the Victorian age. He was a votary of aestheticism, a disciple of Walter Pater. He was a brilliant short story writer and a very successful and popular playwright. Now, he had written many other plays. The Importance of Being Honest is considered to be his masterwork, his masterpiece, his chef-d'oeuvre or magnum opus. Dear friends, why this is considered to be Oscar Wilde's most important contribution to the British dramatic literature needs to be understood in detail. Oscar Wilde was, in and through this play, describing certain Victorian customs, practices, beliefs, and in so doing, he was, in his own way, presenting a stringent critique of some of the issues raised. Now, why and how was Oscar Wilde doing this needs to be discussed in some detail. At the same time, we need to understand how Oscar Wilde was writing about the British upper class in the 1890s in such a carefree, indolent way that the characters display. Characters like Jack, Algy, all of them actually virtually do nothing. They only have a good time. Why is this? Because the empire, the British Empire, confirmed that they could have such a good time because the exploitation of the four corners of the earth was feeding the coffers of the British upper classes in those days. Now, the importance of being honest has been variously interpreted as a customized comedy of manners, a serious existential farce, and as the playwright himself has categorized the play, a trivial comedy for serious pieces. Why and how could Oscar Wilde present a trivial comedy for serious people in this process interrogate the entire dynamics of seriousness and triviality needs to be discussed in some detail. Okay? So, think about these words: importance, honest, trivial, serious. We all know that Oscar Wilde was some kind of a bogeyman with words, like Shakespeare's Hamlet. He was in real life a player, a manipulator of words, a craftsman of words. So actually, Oscar Wilde was playing with the intrinsic meaning of these words and trying to topsy-turvy the whole apparatus of Victorian seriousness. Why should a trivial comedy like this appeal to serious people? Why should serious people read such a trivial comedy? And how and why should a play of this sort, a kind of a reformed comedy of manners, coming in the afterglow of the whimsical or the end of a century? The questions are serious. And the answers will have to be seen or found out in the kind of society that Oscar Wilde was inhabiting. The kind of an age or era that he belonged to. It was the 1890s. It was England. And it was London. Yes, there is a considerable part of the action that takes place in Jack's country house. But the affluence of the late Victorian England is there for everyone to see and sample. The aesthetic movement that tried to poo-poo the scientism of the age, the industrial life, the scientific accomplishments, and the high moral tone, you have to understand, in the 1890s, there was a backlash against these things. The decadents, like Ernest Dawson, Oscar Wilde, Arthur Simmons, and so on and so forth. The members of the Rhymers Club, the contributors to the Yellow Book, were writing in a self-conscious literary vein. As Lionel Johnson says, thought was thinking of itself. And emotion was painting them, was being concerned with them. As a result, thought and emotion, words and ideas, all these things were being juggled with. The decadents were trying to steer clear of any serious utilitarian message. The self-conscious literary style was to a great extent even self-reflexive. Oscar Wilde was trying to write a play about identity, its quest, its many forms, and its provisional nature, whereby one discovery after another could not only pinch it, pinch it, but also tilt it to a great extent. It is at this juncture that I should tell you something of the plot outline, even though I will actually devote an entire presentation to the bare outlining of the plot later on. So, this gist of the plot that I am going to give now will be rather functional and geared toward ensuring your understanding of the points that I am trying to make. This is basically a play of two men about town, Jack Worthing or John Worthing and Algernon Moncrief, who have come in contact with two stubborn girls, Gwendolyn Fairfax and Cecily Cardew, who are hell-bent on marrying a young man, imaginary or real, with the name Earnest. This is basically a kind of a hilarious fantasy, a farcical play, where facts ultimately prove to be stranger than fiction. Jack Worthing, a foundling who was found by one Mr. Thomas Cardew in the great Victorian railway station's cloakroom in a handbag, was a baby without any name, without any identity. He was given an identity by this benevolent old man who adopted him and gave him the name John, because this was a very common name, and Worthing because he had a ticket of that seaside town in his pocket. Ultimately, John Worthing grew up to be quite a companionable young man, well respected in the country, and a guardian to a young girl, the granddaughter of this Thomas Cardew, who calls him Uncle Jack. But Jack Worthing finds it very tedious to stay in the country and behave in a very serious, earnest way to his young word. So he invents an imaginary wicked brother, Earnest, who lives in London, gets into scrapes, and in order to get him out of those scrapes, Jack has to dash to London from time to time. This is basically a kind of an escapade. Jack has a counterpart in London, a dear friend, Algernon Moncrief or LG, who is again a spendthrift, a ne'er-do-well sort of a man who eats, drinks, and remains merry all the time. He also doesn't want to be saddled with an inquisitive and interfering aunt, Lady Bracknell. So from time to time, he also escapes to the country on the pretense of looking after an imaginary ailing friend, Bunbury. So both these young men are leading double lives. Here, their misdeed, their respective misdeeds, are shown to be harmless, even though strictly speaking immoral. These escapades are harmless. Now, Jack has another intention, another attraction to visit London because he has fallen in love with Algernon Moncrief's cousin, Gwendolen Fairfax, Lady Bracknell's daughter. Jack proposes to Gwendolen, is discovered by Lady Bracknell in a wooing attitude and is summarily rejected by her because Jack cannot produce any one of his parents. He gives the address of his country house to Gwendolen, who promises to keep the affair intact and write to him if need be. Yes, Jack has ever refused LG from giving him this address, about which LG has become very curious after discovering about Sicily from a cigarette case, a gift of Sicily to Uncle Jack. So, LG visits Jack's country estate and meets Sicily in the guise of Uncle Jack's wicked brother, Earnest. Meanwhile, Jack has found Earnest very tedious. A disguise to maintain for any length of time. So he has expediently dispatched this imaginary brother. He comes back to his country house in deep mourning, in black attire, supposedly mourning the untimely death of Earnest. So friends, you can very easily understand the kind of situation that is going to take place when Jack comes back after apparently the death of Earnest and meets LG impersonating Earnest in his own country house. Gwendolen, on the other hand, has followed Jack this place. And ultimately, when the two sets of lovers meet one another, a serious quarrel ensues, first between Gwendolen and Cecily regarding their respective attachments to the imaginary Ernest, and ultimately the falsity of both the young men was cleared. Lovers' quarrel ensues, the lovers separate. In order to remedy the situation, both boys decide to get rechristened as Ernest. It is at this juncture that Lady Bracknell comes to the scene in search of her errand girl, Gwendolen. Again, certain complications take place, and ultimately, Lady Bracknell is ready to give the permission to Algy for his intended marriage to Cecily. Miss Prism, the governess of Sicily, comes to the scene at this juncture and is promptly recognized by Lady Bracknell as an irresponsible governess, a nurse of his nephew, Algernon's elder brother, because once Miss Prism had taken out this baby and forgot or failed to return him. Ultimately, Miss Prism has to confess that he had deposited by mistake and carelessness the baby in a handbag in the cloakroom of a railway station. This confession of Miss Prism sets the ball rolling again, and Jack produces the handbag in which he was found as a baby, and Miss Prism recognizes it as her own bag. Ultimately, the whole thing gets cleared up, and it so happens, it so transpires that Jack was really Algy's elder brother and was christened Earnest Moncrief in the name of their now dead father. So ultimately, all live ever after in a fairy story sort of way. So you see, the whole thing is about the quest that Jack has to undertake in order to find out his identity. And how life becomes a kind of an art. And fiction turns out to be reality. You have to understand that it is about this time that England was at the pinnacle of its power and glory. The telegraph, the post, the steam locomotive, all these wonders of technology were taking the human civilization forward at a breakneck pace. And because of Britain's imperialist interests, many of the upper classes could live in a carefree way, spending a lot and bothering a little about earning. In a way, there is a streak of existentialism in this play because here existence precedes essence. Ultimately, the utter carelessness and heedlessness of the characters leave them in a kind of an alien world with ample power to surprise, but without any power to harm in a palpable manner. Where Wilde actually scores heavily with both the critics and the simple readers is in his ability to play with words, to twist language in forms of squint epigrams. And where Oscar Wilde could bestow a thematic unity onto this architectonic structure of a play, that is the importance of being honest. In my subsequent presentations, I propose to deal with certain topics that I may suggest in order to make your reading of the text both interesting and instructive. So this much for the time being. If you have doubts and queries, I am ready for your workshops. Thank you for now.